Elena Jackson walked through the wide, brightly lit corridors of the shopping mall. Her black leather shoes clicked softly against the polished floor as she moved past stores filled with colorful displays. She had come to this place not out of necessity, but because she wanted to find something special for her niece's birthday. The young girl loved scarves, and Elena thought a nice silk one would make the perfect gift. It wasn't often that she took time away from her busy schedule to shop like this, but today felt different. Today she decided to enjoy herself. The mall was alive with activity. Families strolled hand in hand, teenagers laughed loudly near the food court, and shoppers carried bags full of purchases. Elena paused by a boutique window, admiring the elegant mannequins dressed in fashionable outfits. She smiled faintly before stepping inside. The store smelled faintly of perfume and new fabric, and soft music played in the background. A salesperson greeted her warmly, but Elena simply nodded and began browsing the shelves. She picked up a few scarves, examining their texture and design. One caught her eye, a deep emerald green with intricate patterns woven into the silk. It was beautiful, and she imagined how much her niece would love it. As she held it up to inspect it more closely, she noticed two men standing nearby. They weren't customers. They were police officers dressed in dark uniforms with badges glinting on their chests. For a moment, she didn't think much of it. Police officers were common in public places after all, but then she realized they were looking directly at her. Officer Gary Peterson adjusted his belt as he watched the woman in the boutique. His partner, Officer Ryan Lewis, stood beside him, arms crossed. Both men had been patrolling the mall when they received a call about a possible shoplifter. The description was vague. A black woman wearing professional clothing, but it matched the person now standing in the store. Gary leaned closer to Ryan and whispered, "That's her." Ryan squinted, studying the woman carefully. She looked nothing like the usual suspects they dealt with. No hoodie, no nervous behavior, no obvious signs of guilt. Still, appearances could be deceiving. "Let's check it out," he muttered. They entered the boutique, their boots thudding heavily on the tiled floor. The sound drew attention from other shoppers, who turned to see what was happening. Elena glanced over her shoulder, sensing the disturbance behind her. When she saw the officers approaching, her brow furrowed slightly. Something about their demeanor made her uneasy. "Ma'am," Gary said loudly, his voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation in the store. "Can we speak with you for a moment?" Elena lowered the scarf back onto the shelf and turned to face them. Her expression remained calm, though her instincts told her this encounter wouldn't end well. "Of course," she replied politely. "Is there a problem?" "We got a report that you might have taken something without paying," Ryan interjected, his tone accusatory. He gestured vaguely toward the scarf she had just been holding. "Mind explaining why you were so interested in that item?" Elena blinked, surprised by the accusation. "I'm sorry, but I don't understand. I was looking at this scarf because I'm considering buying it for my niece. I haven't stolen anything." Gary smirked, clearly unconvinced. "Sure, ma'am. That's what they all say. Do you mind showing us your receipt?" "I haven't purchased it yet," Elena explained patiently. "I was still deciding whether or not to buy it. If you'd like, I can put it back right now." But instead of backing down, the officers pressed harder. "You know," Gary said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "people like you always come up with excuses when they get caught. Why don't you make this easy on yourself and admit what you did?" Elena's jaw tightened ever so slightly. "People like you." Those 4 words hit her like a slap across the face. She had heard them countless times before, spoken in various forms throughout her life. They carried weight, loaded with assumptions and prejudice. Yet here she was again, facing the same tired stereotypes despite everything she had achieved. "I don't appreciate being accused of something I didn't do," she said firmly. "And I certainly don't appreciate being treated differently because of the color of my skin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll leave the store if that makes you feel better." But the officers weren't satisfied. Instead of letting her go, they blocked her path. "We're going to need you to come with us," Ryan announced. "Just a quick trip to the station to clear things up." Elena stared at them, disbelief mingling with frustration. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I haven't done anything wrong. Surely you can verify my identity and confirm that I'm not some random criminal." Gary sneered. "Oh, we'll verify it, all right. But until then, you're coming with us." Before she could protest further, they grabbed her arms and forced her toward the exit. Shoppers stopped what they were doing, watching in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. Some whispered to each other, while others pulled out their phones to record the incident. Elena kept her head high, refusing to let these men intimidate her. Still, anger simmered beneath her composed exterior. How dare they treat her like this? Didn't they realize who she was? At the police station, Elena sat stiffly in a hard plastic chair, her hands cuffed behind her back. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the room. Officers bustled around, ignoring her presence as if she were invisible. She tried to remain patient, reminding herself that this was temporary. Someone would figure out the truth soon enough. Meanwhile, miles away in Washington, D.C., chaos erupted at the Department of Justice headquarters. Lisa Monroe, Elena's assistant, paced anxiously outside her boss's office. Elena was supposed to deliver a major speech on systemic bias within law enforcement, an event that had been months in the making. But when Lisa called to remind her about the timing, there was no answer. No texts, no emails, nothing. Panic set in as she frantically tried reaching Elena's personal phone, only to hear it ring endlessly. Finally, Lisa decided to contact Marcus Johnson, Elena's husband. Marcus was a well-known journalist respected for his investigative pieces on social justice issues. When Lisa explained the situation, his calm demeanor quickly shifted to concern. "She's not answering her phone?" he asked sharply. "That's not like her." "I've tried everything," Lisa replied. "Her car is still parked outside her building, so I know she left home this morning. But beyond that, I have no idea where she is." Marcus frowned, his mind racing. Elena rarely disappeared without explanation, especially on such an important day. Something wasn't right. Determined to find answers, he grabbed his coat and headed out the door. Little did he know, the events unfolding at the local precinct would soon become national headlines and change their lives forever. As hours ticked by, the tension grew thicker. Back at the station, Elena refused to engage with the officers, questioning her. Every attempt to provoke her fell flat, leaving them visibly irritated. "Look, lady," Gary snapped, slamming a file folder onto the table. "If you cooperate, this will go a lot smoother for you. Otherwise, we can drag this out as long as we want." Elena met his gaze steadily, her voice unwavering. "I've already told you I haven't committed any crime, and unless you plan to charge me with something legitimate, I suggest you release me immediately." Gary hesitated, unsure how to handle her defiance. Most people crumbled under pressure, but Elena seemed unshakable. There was something about her confidence that unsettled him, though he couldn't quite place it. Was she bluffing? Or did she actually believe she was untouchable? Unbeknownst to the officers, news of Elena's arrest was spreading rapidly online. Security footage from the mall showed her innocence, capturing every detail of her interaction with the scarf. Social media users began sharing clips of the confrontation, outraged by the blatant injustice. Hashtags like Free Elena and Justice for Black Women trended nationwide, drawing attention from activists, politicians, and journalists alike. By evening, the story reached Marcus, who was still searching for clues about his wife's whereabouts. As he scrolled through Twitter, his blood ran cold. There, in grainy video footage, was Elena, handcuffed, surrounded by uniformed officers and accused of a crime she didn't commit. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. Then rage surged through him, fueling his determination to expose the truth. With every passing hour, the stakes grew higher. What started as a simple shopping trip had spiraled into a nightmare, one that threatened to expose deep-seated flaws in the system Elena had dedicated her life to fixing. And though she remained outwardly composed, even she couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been wrongfully targeted, dismissed, or silenced because of the color of their skin. As night fell, The stage was set for a reckoning. Elena's arrest had ignited a firestorm, forcing the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, and accountability. But for now, she sat alone in that cold, sterile room, waiting for justice to catch up with her. The police station buzzed with activity, but Elena Jackson remained calm despite the chaos swirling around her. She sat on a hard plastic chair in the corner of the room, her hands still cuffed behind her back. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered occasionally, casting an uneven glow across the dingy walls. Officers moved past her, some glancing curiously but most ignoring her completely. It was as if she were invisible, just another faceless person caught up in the system. Elena's mind raced, though her expression gave nothing away. She replayed the events of the day over and over again, trying to pinpoint where things had gone so horribly wrong. How could two officers mistake her for a shoplifter? Was it simply because she was black? Or was there something deeper at play? Something rooted in prejudice and fear? Whatever the reason, she knew this wasn't just about her. This was about every black person who had ever been judged by their appearance rather than their actions. As time dragged on, Officer Gary Peterson approached her. He carried a clipboard and wore a smug grin that made Elena's stomach churn. "All right, ma'am," he said loudly, his tone mocking. "Let's get this sorted out. You've been accused of theft, and we need your statement." Elena raised an eyebrow, her voice steady. "I already told you I didn't steal anything. I was considering buying a scarf, not stealing it. If you'd bothered to check the security footage, you'd see that." Gary chuckled, shaking his head. "Oh, we'll get to that. But first, let's hear your side of the story. Maybe you can explain why you were acting suspiciously." "Suspiciously?" Elena repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I was browsing a store, same as anyone else. There's nothing suspicious about looking at merchandise before deciding whether or not to buy it." Gary leaned closer, his smirk widening. "That's not what our witness says. They claim they saw you pocketing the scarf." Elena stared at him, incredulous. "What witness? Who are you talking about?" "That's confidential," Gary replied dismissively. "Now, are you going to cooperate, or do we have to make this difficult?" Elena sighed, her patience wearing thin. She knew arguing wouldn't help, but staying silent felt unbearable. "Fine," she said finally. "Ask your questions, but I'm telling you right now, I haven't done anything wrong." Gary nodded, jotting something down on his clipboard. "We'll see about that." Meanwhile, outside the precinct, protests began forming. Word of Elena's arrest had spread quickly thanks to social media. Footage of the incident at the mall showed her being handcuffed and led away by the officers. People were outraged, especially when they learned that the accusation against her was baseless. Protesters gathered outside the station, holding signs and chanting slogans like "Justice for Elena" and "No more racist cops." Marcus Johnson arrived at the scene shortly after hearing about the growing demonstration. His heart pounded as he pushed through the crowd, scanning the area for any sign of his wife. When he spotted Lisa Monroe near the front of the group, he hurried over to her. "Lisa, what's going on here?" he asked urgently. "It's bad, Marcus," Lisa replied, her voice trembling. "People are furious. They're demanding answers and justice for Elena. Have you heard anything from her?" Marcus shook his head, frustration evident on his face. "Not yet. I've tried calling her phone, but it goes straight to voicemail. I don't even know if she's okay." Lisa placed a comforting hand on his arm. "She's strong, Marcus. She'll get through this. But we need to act fast. The longer she's stuck in there, the worse this looks." Marcus nodded grimly. "I agree. Let's start making calls. We need to bring attention to this, not just for Elena, but for everyone who's been treated unfairly because of their race." Back inside the station, Officer Ryan Lewis sat at his desk, scrolling through reports on his computer. Something about the name Elena Jackson nagged at him. He couldn't quite place it, but it sounded familiar. After a few minutes of searching, he found her driver's license information in the system. His eyes widened as he read her occupation. U.S. Attorney General Ryan froze. his heart sinking. He glanced nervously at Gary, who was still questioning Elena. "Hey, Gary," he whispered, motioning for his partner to come over. "You need to see this." Gary frowned, walking over to Ryan's desk. "What is it?" Ryan turned the screen toward him. "Does this name ring a bell? Because it definitely does. For me." Gary squinted at the screen, reading the details. When realization dawned on him, his face paled. "Oh no," he muttered under his breath. "This can't be happening." "What do we do?" Ryan asked, panic creeping into his voice. "If we let her go now, it'll look like we're covering something up, but if we keep her here, we're screwed either way," Gary finished bitterly. "For now, let's just pretend we don't know. Maybe no one will connect the dots." Ryan hesitated, clearly uneasy. "Are you sure that's a good idea? If word gets out that we arrested the Attorney General—" "It won't," Gary snapped. "Just keep your mouth shut, and everything will be fine." Unaware of the officer's growing anxiety, Elena continued to endure their questioning. Gary returned to the interrogation room, his demeanor noticeably colder than before. "All right, Ms. Jackson," he said stiffly. "Let's cut to the chase. Why were you really in that store?" Elena crossed her arms, her composure unshaken. "I've already explained myself. I was shopping for a gift, that's all." "And yet our witness claims otherwise," Gary shot back. "Unless you can prove your innocence, we're going to have to hold you overnight." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Hold me overnight? Based on what evidence? A vague accusation from someone who probably doesn't even exist? This is absurd." Gary shrugged, feigning indifference. "Rules are rules, ma'am. Until we verify your story, you're staying here." Elena clenched her jaw, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. She knew these men weren't interested in the truth. They were scrambling to save face. But she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice firm. "Mark my words, officer. You'll regret this." Gary scoffed, rolling his eyes. Yeah. Save the threats for someone who cares." Outside, the protests grew louder. News vans pulled up to the scene, reporters rushing to capture footage of the demonstrators. Microphones were thrust into the faces of angry citizens, each one eager to share their outrage. Among them was Marcus, who stepped forward to address the crowd. Holding a megaphone, he spoke passionately, his voice cutting through the noise. "My wife, Elena Jackson, is a dedicated public servant, a woman who has spent her entire career fighting for justice and equality," he declared. Yet today she was arrested without cause, humiliated and treated like a criminal, all because of the color of her skin. This isn't just about her. It's about every black person who has faced discrimination at the hands of those sworn to protect us. We demand accountability. We demand justice. And we won't stop until we get it. The crowd erupted in cheers, their energy palpable. Marcus handed the megaphone back to a protester and stepped aside, feeling a mix of pride and sorrow. He was proud of the support Elena was receiving, but he couldn't shake the image of her sitting alone in that cold, sterile room. He needed to get her out, and fast. As the night wore on, tensions inside the station reached a boiling point. Officers whispered nervously among themselves, aware that the situation was spiraling out of control. Protesters banged on the doors, demanding Elena's release. Reporters called incessantly, seeking statements from the department. And through it all, Elena remained steadfast, her resolve unbroken. Finally, Deputy Attorney General Paul Simmons arrived at the precinct, flanked by federal agents. His presence sent shockwaves through the building. Officers scrambled to attention as he strode purposefully toward the holding area. When he found Elena seated quietly in the corner, his expression softened with relief. "Elena," he said gently, kneeling beside her. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Paul," she replied, her voice weary but composed. "But this shouldn't have happened." Paul nodded grimly. "I know, and we're going to fix it. Right now, though, let's get you out of here." With a nod to the agents, Paul helped Elena to her feet. As they walked toward the exit, the officers parted silently, their faces pale with dread. Outside, the crowd erupted into cheers as Elena emerged, blinking in the bright lights of cameras and cell phones. Marcus rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You're safe now," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "That's all that matters." Elena hugged him back, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what had happened. But even as she stood there, surrounded by supporters, she knew this fight was far from over. This was just the beginning. Elena Jackson stepped out of the police station, her eyes adjusting to the bright glare of cameras and the roar of the crowd. The cold night air hit her face, but it felt refreshing after hours spent in the stuffy confines of the precinct. Protesters cheered loudly, their voices rising in unison as they chanted her name. "Elena, Elena," echoed through the streets, a rallying cry for justice. Marcus held her hand tightly, his presence grounding her amidst the chaos. For a moment, Elena stood silently taking it all in. She could see the anger and determination in the faces of the protesters. Some held signs that read "Black Lives Matter" and "End Police Brutality." Others recorded the scene on their phones, capturing every second of this pivotal moment. Despite the exhaustion weighing heavily on her, she felt a surge of gratitude. These people, strangers mostly, had come together to demand accountability. Their support gave her strength. But as much as she appreciated the solidarity, Elena knew the fight wasn't over. This incident was more than just a personal affront. It exposed the deep cracks in a system meant to protect everyone equally. As she turned to address the crowd, her voice carried authority and calmness. "Thank you," she began, her tone measured but firm. "Your presence here tonight means everything. But let me be clear. This isn't about me. It's about every person who has been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, earning thunderous applause. Marcus stood beside her, his arm around her shoulders, offering quiet reassurance. Elena continued, "We cannot allow fear and prejudice to dictate how we treat one another. Today I was accused of something I didn't do. Tomorrow it could be someone else. And unless we stand together and demand change, these injustices will continue." As the crowd absorbed her message, Deputy Attorney General Paul Simmons stepped forward. His expression was serious, his posture rigid. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, raising a hand to quiet the noise. "Ms. Jackson is safe now, but this situation highlights systemic issues within law enforcement. We will not tolerate misconduct or abuse of power. Investigations are already underway, and those responsible will be held accountable." The declaration sparked murmurs among the crowd. While many were satisfied with the promise of action, others remained skeptical. After all, promises were easy to make, but delivering real change was far harder. Elena noticed the skepticism in some faces and made a mental note to address it later. For now, she simply nodded at Paul's statement, signaling her agreement. Back inside the precinct, Officers Gary Peterson and Ryan Lewis sat hunched over their desks, their faces pale with dread. News of Elena's true identity had spread quickly among the staff, and whispers filled the room. Some officers avoided eye contact altogether, while others shot nervous glances toward Gary and Ryan. Both men knew they were in serious trouble. "We're done," Ryan muttered under his breath, running a hand through his hair. "This is career suicide." Gary clenched his fists, frustration boiling inside him. "Don't say that. We can fix this. No one knows we arrested her specifically. If we play our cards right, maybe we can shift the blame." Ryan shook his head, his voice trembling. The days following Elena Jackson's arrest were a whirlwind of activity. The story dominated headlines across the country, sparking fierce debates about race, policing, and accountability. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like "Justice for Elena" and "End Racism Now" as people shared their thoughts, frustrations, and calls for reform. Protesters continued to gather outside police stations in cities nationwide, demanding systemic changes to address racial bias within law enforcement. Inside the Department of Justice, Elena worked tirelessly alongside her team to ensure that this incident wouldn't fade into obscurity. She knew that while her position gave her a platform, it also came with the responsibility to push for meaningful action. Her office became a hub of activity, with staff members rushing in and out, carrying stacks of documents and legal briefs. Lawyers, investigators, and policy experts collaborated on drafting new initiatives aimed at addressing systemic racism in policing. Elena sat at her desk late one evening, poring over reports and case studies. Her eyes burned from hours of reading, but she refused to stop. Each page reinforced what she already knew. This wasn't an isolated incident. Countless others had been wrongfully targeted, harassed, or worse, because of their race. For every name that made the news, there were dozens more who never received justice. The weight of that reality pressed heavily on her shoulders, but it only strengthened her resolve. Marcus walked into the room quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. He placed one on the edge of her desk and leaned against the wall. "You've been at this for hours," he said gently. "Don't you think it's time to take a break?" Elena glanced up briefly before returning her focus to the papers in front of her. "I can't afford to rest right now, Marcus. Every minute counts. If we don't act quickly, people will forget about this, they'll move on, and nothing will change." Marcus sighed, understanding her urgency but worried about how much she was taking on. "You're not going to solve everything overnight, Elena. You need to pace yourself. This fight isn't just yours. It belongs to all of us." She paused, setting down her pen and looking at him. There was gratitude in her expression, but also determination. "You're right, but I have to start somewhere. And if my voice can help amplify those who are struggling to be heard, then I have no choice but to keep going." Meanwhile, officers Gary Peterson and Ryan Lewis found themselves under intense scrutiny. Their actions during Elena's arrest were dissected in detail, both internally by their department and externally by the public. Internal affairs investigators combed through security footage from the mall, witness statements, and records of previous complaints against the officers. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture. Gary and Ryan had a history of questionable behavior. Multiple civilians had filed grievances alleging racial profiling and excessive force, though none of these complaints had resulted in disciplinary action. Now those past incidents were being revisited, adding fuel to the growing firestorm surrounding them. Both men were suspended indefinitely pending further investigation, but many felt the punishment didn't go far enough. At home, Ryan paced anxiously in his living room, replaying the events of that day in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Elena sitting calmly in the interrogation room, her composure unshaken despite their accusations. Even after learning her identity, Ryan hadn't believed she was truly the U.S. Attorney General. It seemed impossible. A woman of such power and influence shouldn't have been someone they could treat so carelessly. Yet here they were facing the consequences of their arrogance. His wife, Susan, watched him silently from the couch. She had always supported his career, proud of his role as a police officer. But now, doubt gnawed at her. "Do you think you made a mistake?" she asked hesitantly. Ryan stopped pacing and turned to face her. His voice was low, filled with regret. "Of course I made a mistake. We both did. We jumped to conclusions without checking the facts, and now we're paying for it." Susan frowned, her concern evident. "What happens next? Are you going to lose your job?" "I don't know," Ryan admitted. "But even if I keep it, I don't think I'll ever feel the same way about wearing the badge again." In contrast, Gary Peterson reacted differently to the fallout. Rather than reflecting on his actions, he doubled down on his belief that he had done nothing wrong. Sitting in his small apartment, he scrolled through online comments about the case, growing angrier with each post criticizing him. To him, the backlash was unfair, an attack on law enforcement rather than an acknowledgement of individual mistakes. When his partner called to discuss strategy, Gary cut him off sharply. "Look, Ryan, we didn't do anything illegal. We followed protocol. People are just using this to push their agenda." Ryan sighed, frustrated by Gary's refusal to take responsibility. "Protocol doesn't mean much when it leads to innocent people getting hurt. Face it, Gary, we messed up. Admitting that might actually help us in the long run." Gary scoffed. Admitting guilt won't save us. All it'll do is give them more ammunition. Trust me, the best thing we can do is stick to our story and hope things blow over. Ryan ended the call shortly afterward, feeling defeated. He realized then that he and Gary were on completely different paths, one seeking redemption, the other clinging to denial. As the investigation unfolded, Elena took center stage once again, this time delivering a powerful speech at a national conference on criminal justice reform. Standing behind a podium adorned with the seal of the Department of Justice, she addressed a packed auditorium of lawmakers, activists, and community leaders. Cameras flashed as reporters captured every word, eager to document her message. Today I stand before you not just as the U.S. Attorney General, but as a woman who has experienced firsthand the failures of a system meant to protect and serve. She began, her voice steady yet impassioned. What happened to me was not unique. It was a symptom of a larger problem, a culture of bias and fear that permeates too many aspects of our society. She went on to outline specific reforms she planned to champion, including mandatory body cameras for all officers, stricter penalties for misconduct, and increased funding for community-based programs aimed at bridging gaps between law enforcement and marginalized groups. Her proposals drew applause from the audience, though she acknowledged that implementing them would require collaboration and compromise. But let me be clear, she added, her tone firm. Reform is not optional. It is necessary. And it must happen now, not tomorrow, not next year, but today, because lives depend on it. Her speech resonated deeply, earning praise from advocates and allies alike. Critics, however, accused her of using her personal experience to push a political agenda. Some argued that focusing on individual cases detracted from broader discussions about improving policing as a whole. Elena anticipated such criticism and responded directly during a Q&A session following her remarks. This isn't about politics, she stated plainly. It's about humanity. When someone is treated unfairly because of the color of their skin, it diminishes us all. My story is just one example among many. If sharing it helps spark change, then I consider it a duty, not a choice. Back in Maryland, the local police department faced mounting pressure to address the issues highlighted by Elena's case. Community meetings were held, where residents voiced their concerns and demanded transparency. Some officers attended these gatherings, listening intently as citizens shared stories of mistreatment and mistrust. Others remained defensive, arguing that most cops performed their jobs honorably and deserved recognition for their efforts. Among those advocating for change was Lisa Monroe, Elena's assistant, who had taken a leave of absence to volunteer with grassroots organizations. She organized workshops and panels focused on educating the public about their rights and encouraging dialogue between communities and law enforcement. Though she lacked formal authority, Lisa's passion inspired others to join the cause. 1. Evening after a particularly emotional town hall meeting, Lisa reflected on the progress being made. Change was slow, often frustratingly so, but she saw glimmers of hope. People were beginning to listen, to really listen, to each other. That alone gave her reason to believe that a better future was possible. As she packed up her materials, a young woman approached her. "Thank you for doing this," she said softly. "It means a lot to see someone fighting for us." Lisa smiled warmly. "We're all in this together. Keep speaking up. Your voice matters." With those words, the young woman nodded and walked away, leaving Lisa to finish cleaning up. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city. Despite the challenges ahead, Lisa felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road to justice was long, but step by step they were moving forward. Weeks had passed since Elena Jackson's arrest, but the ripple effects of that day continued to spread. The nation was still talking about it, dissecting every detail and debating what it meant for the future of policing and racial equality. For Elena, the experience had become both a burden and a catalyst. While she carried the weight of personal trauma, she also felt empowered by the opportunity to drive real change. Her days were filled with meetings, speeches, and strategy sessions, each one aimed at transforming outrage into action. One morning, Elena arrived at her office early, as she often did. She sipped a cup of coffee while reviewing notes for an upcoming congressional hearing where she would testify about systemic racism in law enforcement. The room around her buzzed with activity. Staff members typed furiously on laptops, phones rang nonstop, and papers shuffled across desks. Despite the chaos, Elena remained focused, her mind sharp and determined. As she prepared for the day ahead, Marcus walked in carrying a newspaper. He placed it on her desk, pointing to the front page headline, "Attorney General Pushes Sweeping Police Reform." Beneath the bold text was a photo of Elena speaking passionately at a recent rally. "Looks like you're making waves," he said with a smile. Elena glanced at the article briefly before returning to her work. "It's not about me, Marcus. It's about creating policies that protect everyone, not just people who look like us." Marcus nodded, knowing how much this fight meant to her. Still, he couldn't help but worry about the toll it was taking. "I know, but don't forget to take care of yourself too. You can't pour from an empty cup." Elena gave him a small, grateful smile. "I'll be fine. We're close to something big here. I can feel it." Across town, officers Gary Peterson and Ryan Lewis faced very different realities. Both men were still suspended, their futures hanging in the balance as internal affairs investigators dug deeper into their past conduct. Evidence mounted against them, including security footage from the mall that proved Elena had never touched the scarf she was accused of stealing. To make matters worse, a review of their personnel files revealed a pattern of complaints alleging racial profiling and excessive force. Ryan, increasingly remorseful, decided to cooperate fully with the investigation. He met with investigators multiple times, answering questions honestly and admitting his role in the wrongful arrest. Though it was painful to confront his mistakes, he believed owning up to them was the first step toward redemption. "I let my biases cloud my judgment," he told the lead investigator during one session. "And because of that, I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I'm sorry." The investigator, a stern woman named Detective Karen Hayes, studied him carefully. "Apologies are important, Officer Lewis, but they aren't enough. What will you do differently moving forward?" Ryan hesitated, then replied, "I want to understand why I made those assumptions in the first place. Maybe training or counseling could help. Whatever it takes, I'm willing to learn." Karen nodded, jotting down his response. While she appreciated his honesty, she knew accountability required more than words. It demanded action. Gary, on the other hand, refused to admit fault. During his interviews with investigators, he grew defensive, insisting that he had acted according to protocol. "We followed procedure," he repeated stubbornly. "If anything went wrong, it's because the system failed, not us." Detective Hayes found his attitude troubling. "Procedure doesn't justify targeting someone based on race, Officer Peterson. And if you can't acknowledge that, then we have a bigger problem on our hands." Gary bristled but said nothing. Inside, though, doubt began to creep in. Was he truly blameless, or was he clinging to denial out of fear? The question haunted him, but he pushed it aside, unwilling to face the truth. Meanwhile, public pressure intensified as protests spread to new cities and activists organized nationwide campaigns. Social media played a crucial role, amplifying voices that might otherwise have gone unheard. Hashtags like Sarigwig's Accountability Now and Justice for All trended daily, keeping the issue front and center in the national conversation. Lisa Monroe, Elena's assistant turned activist, became a prominent figure in these efforts. She traveled extensively, speaking at rallies and hosting workshops designed to educate communities about their rights. Her message was simple yet powerful. Change starts with awareness. If we don't know our rights, we can't defend them. At one event in Chicago, Lisa stood before a packed auditorium, her voice steady and clear. What happened to Attorney General Jackson wasn't unique. It happens every day all over this country. But now, we have a chance to say enough. We have a chance to demand better, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. Her words resonated deeply with the audience. many of whom shared their own stories of mistreatment by police. A young man named Jamal spoke up, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've been stopped so many times I've lost count. Each time, I wonder if I'll make it home alive. How long do we have to live like this?" Lisa approached him after the event, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You're not alone, Jamal. None of us are. Together, we can create a world where no one has to live in fear." Back in Washington, D.C., Elena prepared for her congressional testimony. The hearing room was packed with lawmakers, journalists, and citizens eager to hear her perspective. As she took her seat at the witness table, she felt a mix of nerves and determination. This moment mattered, not just for her but for everyone counting on her to speak the truth. When called to speak, Elena leaned forward slightly, addressing the committee with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, today we stand at a crossroads. We can choose to ignore the flaws in our system, or we can confront them head-on. What happened to me is proof that even those in positions of power are not immune to injustice. Imagine, then, what life is like for those without privilege or protection." She went on to outline specific reforms, emphasizing the need for transparency, accountability, and community involvement. Her proposals included mandatory body cameras, independent oversight boards, and increased funding for programs aimed at reducing bias in law enforcement. Lawmakers listened intently, some nodding in agreement while others scribbled notes. During the Q&A portion, a senator challenged her. Some argue that focusing on individual cases distracts from broader discussions about improving policing. How do you respond to that? Elena met his gaze steadily. Individual cases highlight systemic issues. They show us where the cracks are so we can fix them. Ignoring them won't solve anything. It will only perpetuate the cycle of harm. Her response earned applause from the audience, underscoring the widespread support for her vision. As the hearing concluded, Elena stepped outside to find a crowd waiting for her. Supporters chanted her name holding signs that read, "Thank you, Elena, and real change now." Among them was Marcus, who greeted her with a proud smile. "You did great," he said softly. Elena hugged him tightly, feeling a surge of gratitude. "This isn't over yet," she reminded him. "But we're closer than we've ever been." Behind them, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the city. For the first time in weeks, Elena allowed herself a moment of quiet, hope. The road ahead would be difficult, but together, they were building momentum. Step by step, they were paving the way toward justice, for themselves and for everyone who deserved it. Months had passed since Elena Jackson's arrest, and the nation was beginning to see signs of change. The reforms she championed gained momentum, with lawmakers introducing legislation aimed at addressing systemic racism in policing. Communities rallied behind these efforts, holding town halls, organizing protests, and demanding accountability from their leaders. While progress was slow, it was undeniable. People were waking up to the realities of injustice, and they were no longer willing to accept the status quo. Elena stood on the steps of the Capitol building one crisp autumn morning, preparing to deliver a landmark speech. Behind her, rows of chairs were filled with lawmakers, activists, and citizens eager to hear her message. Cameras clicked and reporters jotted notes as she adjusted the microphone, her presence commanding attention. She wore a deep green scarf, the same one she had been accused of stealing, draped loosely around her neck. It was a symbol of resilience, a reminder of how far she had come. "Today," she began, her voice steady but warm, "we gather not just to celebrate progress but to acknowledge the work still ahead of us. What happened to me was a wake-up call, a stark reminder that even those in positions of power are not immune to prejudice. But it also showed me the strength of this nation when we come together to demand justice." Her words resonated deeply with the crowd. Many nodded in agreement, while others wiped away tears. Elena continued, outlining the strides made since her arrest. New laws requiring body cameras for all officers had been passed in several states. Independent oversight boards were being established to investigate misconduct. And perhaps most importantly, Conversations about race and policing were happening openly, breaking down barriers that had long divided communities. "But let me be clear," she added, her tone firm. "This is not the end. Passing laws is only the first step. Real change happens when we live those laws every day, in our actions, our attitudes, and our willingness to listen to one another." The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing across the plaza. When the noise subsided, Elena shared a personal reflection. "I've spent my life fighting for equality, but I never imagined I'd face discrimination so directly. That experience taught me something valuable. It reminded me why this fight matters. It's not about titles or positions. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their skin color, can walk through this world without fear." As she concluded her speech, Elena stepped back from the podium, her eyes scanning the sea of faces before her. Among them was Marcus, who smiled proudly, his camera slung over his shoulder. Lisa Monroe stood nearby, clutching a notebook filled with ideas for future initiatives. And scattered throughout the crowd were countless others, activists, students, parents, and children, who believed in the possibility of a better tomorrow. In Maryland, the fallout for officers Gary Peterson and Ryan Lewis reached its climax. After months of investigation, Internal Affairs released its findings. Ryan, whose cooperation and remorse had been noted, received a reduced sentence, termination from the force, and mandatory participation in anti-bias training programs. While losing his job was devastating, he accepted the decision, viewing it as an opportunity to grow and make amends. Gary, however, faced harsher consequences. His refusal to take responsibility, combined with evidence of past misconduct, led to criminal charges. He was convicted of falsifying evidence and violating civil rights, sentenced to 2 years in prison. As he sat in court hearing the verdict, Gary felt a mix: lost wages and benefits. But more than anything, he felt shame, not just for what he had done, but for the harm he had caused. After serving his sentence, Ryan dedicated himself to education and advocacy. He joined a nonprofit organization focused on bridging gaps between law enforcement and marginalized communities. Though rebuilding trust took time, he found purpose in helping others understand the importance of fairness and empathy. Back in Washington, D.C., Elena returned to her daily routine, though her role had expanded beyond traditional duties. She became a mentor to young activists, offering guidance and encouragement as they navigated the complexities of social justice work. Her office transformed into a hub of collaboration, where ideas flowed freely and partnerships flourished. One afternoon, Lisa stopped by with news of a new campaign aimed at educating teenagers about their legal rights. "We're calling it Know Your Power," she explained excitedly. "It's designed to empower kids to stand up for themselves and their communities." Elena smiled, impressed by Lisa's creativity. "That sounds incredible. Let's get started right away." As winter approached, Elena decided to visit the mall where her ordeal had begun. Walking through its familiar corridors brought back memories both painful and triumphant. She paused by the boutique window, admiring the scarves displayed inside. This time there was no hesitation. She entered the store confidently and purchased the emerald green scarf she had admired months ago. When the salesperson handed her the bag, Elena thanked her warmly. As she walked away, she caught sight of herself in a mirror. The scarf draped elegantly around her neck, a testament to her journey. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this mall months earlier. She was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Elena took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace. The road ahead would still be challenging, but she knew she wasn't alone. Together, with the support of her family, colleagues, and countless others, she would continue fighting for justice, for everyone. As she climbed into her car, Elena glanced at the scarf one last time. It wasn't just fabric, it was a symbol of hope, resilience, and the unyielding belief that change was possible. With that thought, she drove off, ready to face whatever came next.